Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. She is the author of the upcoming book, An Unlikely Prospect. No other than Miss Shelley Blanton-Stroud.
Hello, I'm so glad to be here.
Welcome to Book 101, Miss Shelley. And can you please introduce more about yourself?
Yes, well, I am an author of historical fiction and a lot of time historical crime fiction. I set my novels, my four novels, mainly in the late 1930s and the 1940s. Uh, there we go. That's the new one that you just
Yeah.
brought up. The books one, two, and three are historical mysteries starring one character, Jane Benjamin, and this is the standalone novel featuring Sandy Zimmer.
Miss Shelley Blanton-Stroud, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. And hoping for more and more empowering books like this to come. And Unlikely Prospect is a compiling title. What does it refer to specifically within the
And
story? Is it a
yeah,
person, a mission, or an outcome? And why did you choose it?
yeah, it has a kind of a double meaning, actually. First of all, my main character, whose picture is on the cover, Sandy Zimmer, is a young woman who inherits a newspaper from her publisher husband, who passes away from a heart attack. She's 29 when he does that, and she's 32 at the time of the novel. Um, she's, part of the reason the title is An Unlikely Prospect is because she's highly unlikely to be the publisher of a big city newspaper in San Francisco because there just weren't female publishers back then. And on top of that, she wasn't exactly the kind of person you might guess would take such a leadership role and go head to head with other people in order to debate what's best for the newspaper. The other part of the reason why it's called An Unlikely Prospect is that the newspaper itself is called the San Francisco Prospect, and it's undergoing a lot of trouble. It's failing. It looks like the paper may go under. So both the protagonist and the paper itself are highly unlikely to succeed.
Miss Shelley, World War II fiction is a vast genre. What specific gap, perspective, or untold story did you aim to fill with An Unlikely Prospect?
Well, it's interesting that you use the word gap because that's one of the things that got me interested. Of course, all of my books actually find roles that women have played in history that they haven't really gotten credit for. They haven't been known to play those historical roles. So that's kind of generally true. But there's also another gap that's very, very concrete and important in this story, which is that something happened historically on VJ Day in San Francisco, the day that Japan surrendered and World War II officially ended. There were celebrations all over the United States, all over the world, really, but only in San Francisco did the celebrations turn into rioting, and 1,000 people were hospitalized, and 13 people were killed, and at least 6 women were raped. When I said there was a gap, the word that you chose, it's that there was a gap between what really happened and the historical record of it. At the time, the powers that be put a lid on reporting on those issues, that part of that violent story that happened during VJ Day week. And so it was the gap in the historical record that got me researching to find out why didn't people find, people who live in San Francisco, people who are elderly people who were at that VJ Day celebration have no idea it happened. It never got out. So it was that gap in the record and in the history books that got me writing this story.
Interesting indeed, Miss Shelley. What initially sparked the idea for this particular story? What is the historical event, a
Yeah,
character concept, or
yeah.
something else entirely?
Well, I would say it's two things. First, the historical record I was just talking about, the fact that San Francisco just kind of exploded in rioting at this moment of great celebration, mainly because when when we found out that the war was over, San Francisco was an embarkation point for sailors who would be going off to the Pacific to fight in World War II. And so the city was full of thousands and thousands of sailors, young men, many 18-year-old men who were about to go off to fight. And when they got that message that they would not be going off to fight, that the war was over, those thousands of sailors took to the streets at first celebrating, and then they were given all of this alcohol by business owners who worked along the main street in San Francisco, along Market Street, and even people who sold office supplies or sofas. That day, they started selling alcohol to these young men, and it turned from a celebration to a riot. So that really got me started because I found a very difficult time finding it in the history books or the newspapers. But there was something else that got me started. It was a photograph of the Washington Post publisher, um, Catherine Graham. She was publisher during the time of the Pentagon Papers and the Watergate trial. Um, there was this photograph of her, and she's sitting in her boardroom, and at this long board table are all these men wearing dark gray, dark blue, dark brown suits. And she is the only woman in that room wearing this bright blue suit. And I thought at that time there just weren't there were a handful of other female publishers. But I thought, what must it have been like to be the only woman in such a room, to be in a position where you want to maintain your sense of your historic femaleness, but also you want to make the decisions in that boardroom. So I think those two things together really got me started writing this book.
Who is the central protagonist, and what
Yeah.
makes them an unlikely figure caught up in event or events of World War II?
Yeah, the protagonist is Sandy Zimmer, and she's the young woman I told you about who was previously, she was a very confident secretary to the publisher. And she felt great in her role because she knew what was being asked of her. And it was very culturally right for her to be in service to the great man who ran the newspaper. And then they fell in love and they married. And then she was pretty darn comfortable being the wife of the great man. She was very, very comfortable in a feminine way to be of service like that. But when he passed away and he left the newspaper to her, she felt totally unprepared, first of all, to do the work that was being asked of her. She'd had no training at it, right? And she had no vision of what that might be like. But it wasn't just that, it was that everyone around her wanted to keep her in a small little box. They wanted her to sign the documents that they decided on and to be some kind of figurehead. And for a while, for Sandy, that's okay with her because she's not doesn't feel really prepared to do or be much more than that. But at a certain point, when she goes out into the streets and sees what happens at the peace riot, which is what the newspapers called it, and learns about women who are raped on the street in those riots, It is no longer okay to her just to be helpful to the men who are making decisions because they're deciding not to tell those stories. So she's unlikely because she's never been prepared for it and she's never been expected to be this kind of person. So she has to decide, no matter what anybody else thinks, I am prepared and I'm going to do what I think is right.
Definitely. What is right,
Mhm.
people. And can you describe a key relationship in the book and how the pressure of war shape or test the bond?
Yeah, actually, one of my favorite relationships in the book is between my protagonist, Sandy Zimmer, and the protagonist of my first three books. They both take place in the same world, but they have different protagonists. So, my first three books featured Jane Benjamin, who, as I like to call her, is a cotton picking, cross dressing gossip columnist. She's been an Okie who immigrates to the to California during the Dust Bowl. And she, in order to get a job in the Great Depression, she dresses like a man to get a job and she starts working her way up in the newspaper until she becomes actually the gossip columnist for the newspaper. That character is brash and ambitious and loud and noisy, and she takes up too much room. She's a bit on the selfish side. She doesn't say please or thank you. She's a very difficult woman. And yet now Jane, is best friends with the new publisher, Sandy, who is just a little bit her opposite, very, very in the habit of retaining her feminine station in life. Yet they're best friends because they recognize in each other their shared intelligence and their real backbone when you get down to it. And the fact is, they also have ambition in common. It's just expressed differently. So I truly loved writing scenes with the two of them together because they fuss and they bicker, they disagree about the way to go about things, but ultimately they don't respect anyone more than they respect each other.
Interesting indeed, Miss Shelley. Where and during what specific phase of World War II is the novel primarily set?
Yeah.
Why was the time and place crucial for your story?
Yeah. It's an interesting question you asked because it really takes place on the very last day of World War II. It's when World War II is ending, and it's the reaction to the end to war that I was very interested in. Of course, I was interested in the reaction of the young sailors who were so relieved not to have to go to war. So that was part of it. But also, this was a moment in time that interested me because in my previous book, I had dealt with the women who were like the Rosie the Riveters in 1942, who first got their union cards to be able to work for really good pay in the shipyards in the Bay Area of San Francisco. And all of a sudden, during World War II, with all the men gone, they needed women to do this work to build the airplanes and to build the ships that would help us to win that war. And
Yeah.
women changed during World War II when they got those jobs and felt, well, they really had a purpose. They were helping the whole country by doing that. And yet, what's interesting is about this exact moment when World War II ends is also the moment when the men will come back. And of course, there were also women fighting in that war too, but mostly men. When the men were going to come back from war, the thing that the Rosie the Riveters and other women in the workforce didn't expect was when the men came home, the women workers would be told, great, thanks for doing what you did. Now go back home. We need dinner made. We need the children watched. We need the laundry done. So it was like, if you go back and look at the historical records of the women who did that work, it was a real shock to the system to all of a sudden be told their services were no longer needed. And so there's like this pivotal moment, this big difference between World War II, the state of women's usefulness to the United States, And after World War II, when all of a sudden they were stripped of all that purposefulness, and there came a new era, the 1950s, when women had a different reaction to the use of their qualities and their skills.
Miss Shelley, as an author, what are your short-term and long-term goals?
I came late to this business of writing. I taught writing classes at university for 34 years, and then started as an author late. And when I started, I was just going to try this thing with one novel, see what I thought. And I loved it so much. It really, really stretches me in ways that I want to be stretched. And I decided after my first novel, Copy Boy, that I would like to do this for the rest of my life. And I don't know what that will mean in terms of, the books themselves. What will happen? Will I keep writing Sandy Zimmer novels for a couple more novels? Will I turn to something radically different? I don't know. But what I do know is I'm going to keep writing. I found something that I myself postponed doing for such a long time until I was 50 because I was waiting for my children to be launched. I always worked, but I just couldn't focus on anything that took so much of my mind space away from my family. Then when my kids were out of the house, I said, now it's time for me to do this. And since I started so late, kind of decided I'm going to do this as long as I live or as long as I care to do it. So when you ask what are my long-term goals, it's to live this life as a writer, to come up with these stories, to do this research, to learn about the past and the way that it connects to what we're living through in the present, and keep having conversations with people like you, which is, really the part of teaching that I miss after retiring from teaching college. I miss the conversations. So I didn't know that I'd get to have so many conversations as a writer as well.
Good luck to your goals, Miss Shelley. And what would be your piece of advice for those people out there who want to be an author like you?
Well, I guess it would be two pieces of advice. One would be the same thing that everybody tells you, and that is to read widely and to discover what you love. I mean, one of the benefits for me, I haven't always been a reader. I always identified as a reader, not a writer, because I kind of didn't picture myself as someone who would be capable of being a writer. I just didn't believe it. So I saw myself as a great reader. And I even led library groups in the book clubs for libraries for 10 years. And over that time period of reading so carefully, I learned the kind of books I love. So when it was time for me to write, I knew what I needed to write because I knew what I liked to read. So that would be one thing. And the second thing I would say is just write. It doesn't matter if it's not good enough. It doesn't matter if you're not validated enough. Just write, and it builds on itself. And not only do those pages accumulate, but as you do that daily writing, you find yourself getting better and better.
Yes, write and write and write, people, and stop procrastinating. If you have the passion to write, share to the world. Thank you for that advice, Miss Shelley. And can you please recommend a books or book that influence your journey?
Oh, that's really interesting. There are so many of them. But one book that I was thinking about just today, it's one of many that influenced me, but one book that influenced me was The Other Typist by Suzanne Rindell. And it was set, in a historic time in the maybe the late 20s in a city. And the thing about that book that really interested me was that it showed two female characters who were in a way kind of frenemies. They weren't exactly friends. They had some aggressive feelings toward each other, but they were very tied up to each other. And I think I really loved reading about female friendship, and I knew that I would be doing that in these novels.
Well, thank you for that recommendation, Miss Shelley. And what does an unlikely prospect ultimately reveal about human nature? It is capacity for both good and evil, or under the extreme duress.
It's funny, there's a line in the book that comes from uh, Earl Warren, who is our Supreme Court Justice, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And at the time of the novel, he's a character. He's the governor of California where this takes place. And he says something that is in his biography, as he said, the job makes the man. And meaning that he changed over his long career as he was given new responsibilities and even more demanding jobs. He grew into those tasks. And so a line in the book may be something I hope people take from it, which is the job makes the woman. When a woman is given an opportunity to do something serious and important, it will expand what she's already doing and grow what she's capable of doing.
Miss Shelley, very well said. Beautifully articulated. But before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please don't listen to my other podcast, people. My other podcast, because my abstract essay is already in fifth season, abstract poetry in second season, and my book 101 review in fifth season too, comedy 101 in second season, and my food 101 in fifth season as well. Geography 101 in its fourth season, and my baby podcast Law 101 and Mental Health 101. Love Letters in third season, and Movie 101 Review and Music 101 in its fourth season, and Science 101 and Sex 101 in its first season. Please listen to them wherever you listen to your podcast. Miss Shelley, why do you believe stories set during World War II continue to resonate so powerfully with contemporary readers?
Well, I think there are a lot of literal things that are similar between the World War II era and now. I mean, we hear people talk on the news all the time about questions of fascism and resistance and so on. These are terms we learned a lot during World War II. So that's very, very concrete and specific. But I'll also say there's a famous line, and I think it was Mark Twain who said that history does not repeat itself, but it rhymes, meaning like you return to something, it looks an awful lot and sounds an awful lot like what you experienced in the past. And so I think humans are humans everywhere in the world, and they always are, no matter what time period we're in. And so I think that looking at a different time period for what humans were doing can often reveal something meaningful to us about the humans we know today.
Something meaningful for sure. Miss Shelley Blanton-Stroud, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world through your books. So, can you please invite our listeners to support your books, your advocacy, or any projects that you're doing
Yeah.
right now?
Well, I welcome you, and I'd be so grateful if you would look for my books under Shelley Blanton Stroud wherever books are sold. This one will be available beginning August 19th, though it's possible to pre order it now.
Yes, people, let's support Miss Shelley Blanton-Stroud, because if you support her, for sure, more and more and more empowering books like this to come. So, Miss Shelley, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Daniel.
More to come, people. See you soon.